And we're joined now by the UKIP MP Douglas Carswell, who of course used to be a Tory MP. Welcome back to the Daily Politics. Michael Heseltine, first of all, David Cameron urged the Tory party to stop banging on about Europe. He's failed to achieve that spectacularly, hasn't he?
There's an element in the Conservative Party which constantly raises the issue. That makes the Prime Minister's job difficult. It made John Major's life difficult, and I regret it. And there are those of us who believe strongly that the record of the Conservative Party in Europe is a good one. We don't argue the case because...
Why not?
Simply because we know the divisions that follow, the divisiveness, the headlines, the apparent undermining of the Prime Minister. And so we follow his example of trying to concentrate on the issues that really matter. Immigration, that is a big issue. The economy, absolutely fundamental. Europe is actually way down the rating of public opinion.
Do you agree with Michael that actually Europe is not top of people's priorities?
One of the many reasons I left the Conservative Party is because I think being on the wrong side of the Europe question for 40 years is an existential crisis for Conservatives. And it means that no mainstream Conservative manifesto can be credibly offered to the British people with the expectation that once elected they could act on it. Immigration, you can't control our borders unless you do something about our EU membership. In fact, even the very limited proposals David Cameron's come up with, he had to get permission from Angela Merkel. It's impossible to stand for office promising to lower energy prices when the increase in energy prices caused by our renewable targets is engineered by Brussels. Again and again and again, on issue after issue, we can't actually adopt a free market, credible alternative to the corporatist status quo without addressing the Europe question.
Let's just look at the issue. You said immigration is an issue of real concern to people. Well, let's take that example that Douglas Carswell's brought. That was the problem with the net migration target of tens of thousands. It wasn't ever achievable because we can't control the migration from within the EU. It was wrong to make that pledge, wasn't it?
I think it's been harder to deal with than David Cameron realised at the time he made it. There's no doubt about that. But what people have to take into account is that suppose you had controlled the immigration figures of the sort of level, well, frankly, what public service would still be available?
That's a separate issue.
Well, why is it separate?
Immigration is really important, but as long as we remain in the European Union, 400 million people will have an automatic right to come
back. But hang on, Douglas Carswell, that assumes that the issue with immigration is all about numbers. Is the immigration issue all about numbers for everybody, or is it actually sometimes the consequences of immigration? Let's just take up the point that actually what would have happened if, let's say, numbers had been controlled and they had been brought down to tens of thousands 5 years ago. What would have happened to some public services and certain sectors of the industry?
There's a case to be made, as a UKIP MP find myself frequently making, for labour mobility. But you can't argue for labour mobility until you control your borders. And you can't control your borders if 400 million Europeans have an automatic right to come here. It's incredible for the Conservatives to say they're going to control immigration and remain in the European Union. It cannot be done.
But you see, I mean, perhaps I'm now older and not good at this sort of party political nonsense.
No, I think you're pretty good at it.
The idea that 400 million Europeans are going to give up the whole of France, the whole of Germany, the whole of Austria...
That's not what I said.
Oh, yes, you did.
Yes,
but the implication, what you're trying to imply, is that we're going to have trainloads, millions of people.
And
Douglas, you're a very clever guy. You are insulting people by using examples of that.
Is that scaremongering? Yeah, but is that scaremongering? Obviously, yes, potentially, in some sort of word, 400 million people would have the right, but they're not going to take it up, are they?
Many are, and that is what's causing considerable disquiet.
Yeah, but
look, you cannot credibly stand for election.
Don't talk over each other.
Why do you talk about 400 million when you know as well as we all know there is no prospect of anything other than the tiniest fraction of those people even thinking of coming here? And frankly, why don't you talk about the Brits who are going to Europe?
It only needs quite a small fraction of 400 million for us to have real problems of oppression on social services. I think you cannot be credible on controlling our borders and say we must remain in the European Union.
So when you talk about the pressure on social services, what about the social services which are filled by people coming from Europe, which we could fill in no other way?
Well, there is an argument for labour mobility, but a prerequisite of making that is the ability to control our borders,
right,
like Switzerland or Australia.
Let's just put the issue
EU.
of immigration just to one side for the moment, because, Michael Heseltine, you started by saying that you and some of your Europhile colleagues have not come out publicly and argued the pro-European case.
Yes.
Do you think, in a way, you must take responsibility then if you have allowed your Eurosceptic colleagues and UKIP to control the narrative?
I think we're torn between loyalty to the party. Just before you start intervening, we're torn between loyalty to the party and our own very deep convictions. I mean, it is a fact that every leader of the Conservative Party that I have worked for has argued passionately for a closer involvement in Europe. Right. Not because they want to surrender sovereignty, but because they want to influence, from Britain's point of view, what is happening in Europe.
But have you lost that argument? I mean, is it the case that part of the reason you've lost the argument and that's why you are quiet?
We haven't lost the argument.
Is His Lordship still in favour of Britain joining the Euro? I think that's what we need to hear. Are you still in favour of Britain joining the Euro, Your Lordship?
We will join the Euro.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Is this the authentic voice of the Conservative Party establishment speaking?
No, it is not. It is not. It is a very personal view which the establishment of the party wouldn't agree with. If I had to parade my conviction, I have lived through every one of these European arguments where we have resisted at every stage the European direction, and in every stage we in the end have given in and joined. You see, the arguments that people like you parade, it was called EFTA.
Maybe it's the establishment in Westminster that gives in. Maybe the people want out.
No, but you see, we've had general election after general election, and they have never voted out. And the Labour Party...
Let's see what happens in May.
Well, we know perfectly well that the UKIP will not be anything like as powerful by then.
Well, if we keep going like this, it could do rather well.
And that the best they could happen would be a tiny number of votes, members of Parliament, not about Europe, but about immigration.
Right, well, hang on. So when would you or advise Britain to join the Euro?
Oh, not in the foreseeable future.
Right, but do you still think it will happen?
I think that what is happening in Europe, what is happening in the world, are globalization forces. And the real issue that we have to face in this country is a very simple one, put like this. Do you want Germany to have hegemony over Europe, a dominance of Europe, to our exclusion?
Right.
And I don't.
Douglas Carswell, just the general point, though, that Michael Heseltine is suggesting that in the end, the sort of Europhile general argument of going along with joining up to various European treaties, it happens eventually, and history has proven that, hasn't it?
What has happened is the Conservative Party's always tried to hoover up votes by sounding sceptic, but ended up doing what His Lordship would like. What I think we need to recognise, though, is the establishment, it's the ministers and mandarins who've ended up going along with more Europe, despite what they say before elections. The people don't want any part of it. The people, I think, want to leave the European Union and have free trade agreements with the European Union. Now, that's perfectly doable. Switzerland does it. Norway does it. Australia, countries like that, they have control over their own borders. They have control over their own law, but they have free trade. That's what we need.
Do you think UKIP will survive into the long term?
No.
At all?
No. Look, what is happening is we've had 6 years of very intense recession, and the traditional way in which people protest was to go to the Lib Dems. But the fact of the matter is they're in coalition. And what is happening all over Europe, whether it's Le Pen in France, or whether it's the guys in Italy, or whether it's Austria, or whether it's even Germany now, is that you have got these right-wing
racist parties?
In many ways, it's the immigration issue and the recession that has driven this issue.
What do you say about that characterisation of being compared to those other right-wing parties in Europe?
I'm appalled. I won a by-election where 6 out of 10 voters voted for me by arguing a sensible policy on immigration. We need to control it. We need the Australian system. And I think most sensible people outside Westminster recognise that is desirable. It's not about race, and it does His Lordship disservice to try and smear us as being racist.
It's very interesting. You see, we've had all this issue about Enoch Powell and Mr Farage's admiration of Enoch Powell. I lived through the Powell speech, one of the most immoral speeches of modern times, in my view, because it promised nothing. It just raised the temperature.
UKIP is not
and the reason, well, you should listen to what Mr Farage is saying.
But you do accept that there are lots of people who vote for UKIP who don't hold those sorts of views.
Yeah, but the basic, of course, we're not making these phony statistics of the sort you're suggesting. What I'm saying is that the reason why Enoch Powell made his speech was to stop the Tory party voting for the Labour Party's race relations bill. My profound view, and the view of the Conservative Party, is that anyone in this country of any colour, class or creed has equal rights, and Powell was trying to stop that happening.
What do you say to that? I mean, if that, if the view is that UKIP is a short-term phenomenon as a result of a recession, as a result of people looking for something to fill a political vacuum, which seems to be the implication. What say you?
I'm very happy for the Tory grandee establishment to underestimate UKIP and keep on doing so. We got 4.2 million votes in the European elections. We won 2 by-elections convincingly. I think there are hundreds of thousands of people probably watching this programme who want real change and who recognise they're not going to get it from a party that talks Eurosceptic in the run-up to elections, but ends up agreeing with Michael Heseltine about further integration, the authentic integrationist voice of the Conservative Party establishment.
Do you think Douglas Carswell could ever be tempted back to the Tory party?
I hope not.
Right, you couldn't.
We agree on much.
Right,
that.
OK. And in terms of the Conservative Party, do you think Europe will eventually split the Conservative Party? The issue? You don't.
The Tory party is an immensely sophisticated political force. It is the most successful democratic organisation in human history. And it has an enormous sense of survival.
Of entitlement.
All right, I'm going to say thank you to Douglas Carswell.